Hello and welcome back to the channel. On this episode, I thought we would talk about 5 tips to improve your live vocal mixes. And there's a few bonus tips at the end as well. So let's get started. Number 1, really listen to the vocal. Turn off the compression, reset the EQ, mute any effects, and then set your gain. Everything starts with good gain structure. Starting with a pure solid signal helps keep you from missing something and from starting with yourself in a hole on your vocal channels. You don't even really want to do any EQ at this point. You just want a solid signal and to really listen to the voices and to start to think about what you might want to do with the EQ as we move along through these steps. Obviously, if a vocal tries to feed back when you first bring that vocal fader up, then you need to address that either with the system EQ or the channel EQ. And this is where having your RTA engaged on a console like the X32 or the XR18 can be really helpful. It will clearly show you where that feedback is at. As for EQing the vocal for sound shaping purposes, you ideally want to hear the vocal in context of the music to make those decisions. What you might try and what you might think you need to do now with the EQ with the vocal so low and no music could cause you to do too much. You might remove the character from the voice that would ultimately help it stand out in the mix. And this is how some people get a little overeager and create problems for their mix. As you gain experience, you might be better able to predict what you'll need to do before you hear the vocal with music and just tweak from there. But that's because with experience, you'll get a better reference to understand exactly how the vocal will translate to the full band mix. There's no shame in taking a conservative approach and not digging yourself into a hole at this early stage of the sound check. And there's little to be gained by rushing to the EQ right now anyway. And that brings us to the next thing we want to address at this early point in the vocal check. Number 2, using our low cut filter, also known as the high pass filter. The low cut can serve a couple of purposes. For one, it can be used as a sound shaping tool to roll lows off a source and to thin that source. In most cases though, and in this case, we're going to use this so that the channel isn't picking up sounds lower than the voice of our singers. This will remove low-end stage wash from the vocal mics. You can essentially think of this as making the mic less sensitive to things like the low end from the bass guitar and the drums on stage. Technically though, the mic is still hearing those things, but the board is filtering those things for us. Unless you're dealing with a deep baritone vocalist, generically 100 Hz is a fairly safe setting. If you want to be more precise, you can bring the high pass filter frequency up until you hear it start negatively impacting the low end of the voice, then just bring it back a bit. Not only will this help our vocal channel not sound as muddy, but it'll help to reduce if not eliminate plosives. Plosives are the P pops you sometimes hear on certain consonants, particularly words with a P or a B. And, as an aside, this technique is also useful for things like a pulpit or lectern mic where this problem can get both annoying and bad. So now we've got our gain set and we've set our high pass filter. Ideally, while we were doing those things, we've been listening to the vocal and analyzing it and thinking about what we might want to do by EQ for the vocal. And that brings us to number 3, EQing the vocal. First, let's address a common EQing mistake made by some people. One common mistake that gets made is people will try and boost way too low on the EQ to fatten a voice to try and give it some body. They'll even think it worked, but what generally happens is the operator raised something like 80 Hz several decibels when they really needed to raise 160 Hz only a few decibels. If we look at the graph, you can see how raising 80 Hz eventually does raise 160 Hz as well. All of that excess low end was really raised for nothing except to increase the chances of picking up low end mud and increasing the odds of low end feedback. You really want to make sure and strive to do your EQ work where it's centered on the area you want to be working on. That way, you get maximum benefit for minimum EQ adjustments. It really pays to learn where instruments and voices have dominant energies before you reach for an EQ knob. I'll post a link to an EQ cheat sheet in the text description below. With that warning and advice out of the way, ideally you'd get your singer to sing now with the band so that you can address the vocal EQ within the context of the actual mix. The first thing you want to do now is listen for where you can cut. Cut first should always be your first consideration. And work in small steps, not big bites. Don't be surprised if the vocal actually sounds okay just as it is. The high pass filter could have been enough. Many a mix has been ruined by too much EQ. You definitely don't want to cut and adjust the EQ so much that you suck the life out of your signal. Let's talk about some general EQ tips. If the vocal sounds harsh, that is likely a high mid region cut that you need to make. If the vocal sounds honky, that is likely a 600 hertz range issue that needs cut. If the vocal sounds too thick, maybe look at around 250 hertz and cut there. These probably won't be huge cuts, just a few dB. When you make these cuts, you might sweep left or right to really listen for the target area that seems to best pinpoint the area that you don't like. You'll probably only need one or two cuts, and as you do make these cuts, it's going to change the perspective of what you originally heard with the voice and expected you might need to do. For example, a cut at 250 Hz might negate a 2.5K slight increase you originally thought the vocal might need to cut through the music. Always listen at each step and make sure what you just did actually helped before going forward. Put it back if it didn't help. Don't dig a hole and then make it deeper. For vocal EQ, the lower end is one thing, but the high mids and highs can be tricky. For one thing, cut that area too much and the vocal quickly gets lifeless. Boost in those areas too much and the mic becomes more susceptible to feedback, and it can also make the voice sound harsh or brittle. Therefore, a little usually goes a long way. Always use your ears. A high mid lift can really help a vocal cut through a mix, especially a guitar heavy mid range filled mix. A 10K lift can really help give the vocals a bit of air. Some vocalists might have a problem with sibilance. That's a problem where you'll notice their S's stand out too much.
Standing on my own, hold your body next to mine. Standing on my own.
That is generally a 5K to 8K problem, and a small cut here can help.
Standing on my own, hold your body next to mine.
This is also a place a de-esser can be used and inserted on a vocal channel to help you instead of attacking it with EQ. Whatever you do with your EQ, typically a conservative approach will pay dividends within the mix. And that brings us to number 4, compression. This is another area where a light touch can pay dividends. Generally, you'll just want to take some peaks off and narrow the dynamic range a bit. You don't want to squeeze all the life out of the vocal. Also, if you're doing monitors from front of house, your singers aren't likely to want to be singing into high levels of compression. The video link above talks about this monitor issue in more detail, so if you're doing monitors from front of house, you might want to check that link out, even if you're using a different mixer. Regardless of the mixer, the concepts will remain the same. For vocal compression, generally a ratio of 2:1 or 3:1 are fairly safe settings, especially if you pay attention to your threshold setting and your gain reduction meter. You won't want all or even most gain reduction lights to light up for typical vocal compression settings. Flickering the top couple or 3 of the gain reduction lights can be sufficient, especially if you're not really confident about compression. We are more interested in smoothing the peaks here. If your compressor has a setting for auto time or auto attack and release, then vocals are a perfect place to use that setting. Once you set a light ratio like I mentioned, you can then adjust the threshold control to get the meters reading like I just described. In a recording situation, you can get away with being more aggressive with the gain reduction. Live, you need to tread a little bit more carefully. If you have a singer that's inconsistent or overly dynamic, you could certainly try sliding up to a 4:1 ratio. But that said, live shows have live dynamics. It's part of the excitement of a live performance. Always be willing to take a step back for a moment and try and listen to the performance both from the perspective of an audience member and from the perspective of the band. And on to our 5th tip, effects. Reverb can really enhance and lift a vocal, or it can bury it, literally. I have a few general rules I use as baselines. Faster songs, I typically go with a shorter decay. Slower songs like ballads, I usually go with a longer decay. I consider 1.5 seconds as a baseline decay setting for vocals, and then adjust there up or down for the actual song tempos.
standing on my own. Hold your body next to mine. Standing on my own. Standing on my own. Standing on my own. Hold your body next to mine.
We're into the realm of subjectivity here, and you have to use your ears and you have to consider the band and the music. Really, just remember, most times the effects are to enhance the vocal, not overwhelm the vocal. Rarely is the effect something that's at the forefront of a song. Always try and be tasteful. If you wonder if it's too much, the odds are greater you can reduce the effect and not hurt anything versus maybe it actually is too much. There's another situation you might find yourself in. You can't just consider the effect you want to hear, you also have to consider the venue you're in. If you're in some large, overly reflective room, you might be better off just muting the effects for that gig. If you're outdoors with nothing for the sound to reflect off of, you might need to mix wetter than you're used to. In either of those cases, you need to use your ears and understand your surroundings. Physics has a way of winning these type of situations. Alright, that's our 5 tips, but here are some bonus things to consider. It's probably important to point out that you should never forget to let the mix breathe. Don't get caught into thinking you constantly need to be changing things on the console. Sit back and listen to your mix. Listen to the band. Don't get caught up fighting the natural dynamics of the band, thinking that it's always bad if something stands out. Maybe it's supposed to stand out. Maybe you're just being hypersensitive and listening too critically rather than artistically. You don't always want to try too hard to put things in a neat and tidy box. Sometimes you just need to let the band be the band. Let me know of any tips and tricks you use for your vocal mixes in the comments section below. Please like and subscribe to the channel and click the affiliate links to support the channel. Follow these links to check out some of the other channel videos, and I will see you next time.